All right, hey family, how are you guys? Hope you guys are all having a good week. We are back with another episode of The Spark, and this week we're going to talk about community, why it's important, really just why it's one of my favorite functions of the church. So I'll toss it out to you guys. Why is community important for us?
I think coming from the oldest perspective in the room, which is always the case these days, I just know that over lifetime events and things that happen and good and bad and ups and downs, it's just so important, has been to us, to have our people to celebrate and to talk through things and to grieve with. And I just value the times that I've been able to do that for other people, but also that it's been done for me. And that's where it's done, is in our community of believers.
I love community groups, which we have called them life groups in the past, but mostly because that's the place where we get to do life with one another. And I've been leading a life group, community group now for like 8 years or something, and it's looked like all different things. I've led women's only groups at a time when Colin wasn't able to be there, and every single one of the people that I've spent time with in that kind of life group setting or community group setting, it still has a special place and a part of my life and a part of my heart. Even if it's somebody that I don't spend as much time with or talk to as often, I still think about them and pray for them and things like that, because it is that life on life experience of the depth that happens so fast because you're in the trenches with them, especially going through the stage that we're at with our families of raising young kids, where when you can go over to somebody's house and just like dump your kids in the door and walk in and be like, your kids are going to be feral, my kids are going to be feral, let's let them run crazy and have some food and hang out, which is what our life group, our community group has been the last little bit, which is so great, because you get a chance to see how other people parent. I've learned things from my life group members about how I want to parent, how they love their spouses, how they just do life together, and it's those little moments that make all the difference in our own lives too.
I think simply put, like, life's just better together. And I think community grasps that. And that's the picture we get in so much of the gospel. I love that you talked about, like, Jesus in the book of Luke is either coming to, going from, on his way. Like, it all revolved around food. Always. And, like, the picture of, like, we all know I love food. Like, I don't think that's any surprise here. But it's always revolved around, like, the table. And I was really challenged this week, especially with, like, what does that look like in my life? Like, how can I open my table even more? And I love that you made the simple, like, fact that, like, maybe for you, your table is a lawn chair. Like, maybe for you, it's a spot by the bleacher. Like, maybe for you, it's at the coffee shop, like, whatever that is. But, like, community is important because, like, life is better together.
Yeah. I think it's really important. One of the things we talked about this Sunday, but coming out of, like, a pandemic that shut everything down, I think we realized how important, like, community was, and, like, being in connection with other humans, right? Like, that's such a big deal. And what did you guys think about, we talked about how Jesus spent 90% of his earthly ministry with a small community of people, like building them up and ultimately encouraging them to do the same thing with other people. But when you think about that, we oftentimes think about Jesus like feeding 5,000 and all of these big crowds that followed him. But you talk about 90% of his ministry was done in the context of those 12 humans, right? Those 12 disciples, which is crazy to think about. But, like, what does that make you? What does that bring to mind when you guys think about, like, man, Jesus spent so much time invested in that small group? But at the end, the role for that group was to not stay in that group. It was how many more can we now bring in? But it was an investment early on by Jesus. What did that bring to mind when we talk about Jesus investing in that small circle of people?
I think a big piece of it for me is the multiplication of that, because as a staff that's this big, we realize that we can't meet all of those needs for community, for life events, for support and encouragement and being known. And so that's where our community groups then and those leaders are able to establish that small community all throughout the church. And then that role doesn't fall to just us. I think that's so critical that community is multiplied in that manageable number throughout the church.
Spreads the I guess the weight of everything out
Yeah.
that we're trying to do as a church. Yeah. What else?
I think the inclusivity that you see in the people that Jesus chose. And you talked about that when you talked about like Matthew was the outsider.
Yeah.
And Matthew was the one that no one wanted to be with. And he still chose Matthew. And there can be a tendency, because we all like to hang out with the people that we like, the people that are like
People
us.
that are easy.
The
Yeah.
people that are easy. And you talked about on Sunday that the mess isn't always easy, but that's what we have to get into the middle of to love people like Jesus did. And so it's something that we have to be intentional about. Who do we include in our group? And when we mix things up and we spread out beyond just the 12 people that we know, how do we include people that maybe aren't the people we would always pick first? Because sometimes they don't ever get picked first. And it's important to include people who are the Matthews and make sure that they're being loved and known and cared for as well, even if it's hard and even if it's messy.
Speaking of being picked last, why do you think it is, like we said Sunday, like it's messy, it's pretty much messy all the time, but it's not complicated. Why do we have a tendency to push away from it sometimes though?
I think because, and it's sometimes like a cop-out answer, but like we like to be comfortable. Like so many times we know what we should do, we just don't do it. Like James talks about, like it's sin to know what you ought to do and to not do it. Because he knows James always just throws a right hook anytime he can. So like he's like, hey, you know in your heart what you should be doing. And I've had so many good conversations even today about like we as just people, as humanity, like we long to be included and accepted and a part of something bigger than ourselves. And I think community grasps that, but we're also selfish creatures. And so once we have that, like we just want to hold on to it. Like that, it kind of becomes an idol in a sense. And so, one of my favorite things that I've heard about Jesus is like, so often we leave the individual to go to the crowd, but Jesus left the crowd to go to the individual, because I think Jesus's heart was relationship and was, taking those who are far away and bringing them close. That's why he came to this earth.
Yeah, that's good. And we talked about, like, there are so many ways where we get a touch in our community throughout the week, throughout the year, through the big events that we try to do where we serve our community and all those kinds of things. But Jesus would have taken it one step further, which is what makes community a little bit messy, because you have to lean into and you have to be vulnerable and hear some of the vulnerability that other people have. And I think sometimes that is what puts us in a space where we're just a little bit uncomfortable with that. And I always think that's the most difficult part. Once you get over that hurdle and you feel like, oh, someone's seen me be a little bit vulnerable and I've seen them, like, then we can begin to share a real relationship. Yeah. Whereas our Sunday mornings highs and buys, like those are just so surface. We just scratch the surface of telling people how much we care about them or being able to show them that. But there's a next step that Jesus always took, and that's, he healed the man, and then he saw Matthew, and he went with Matthew to his home, and he spent some actual time and investment in them. So we love the idea of community. That's what we are all about. We were created out of community and for community, and we think it's one of the most important things for us as believers. We are excited to continue our series this week, and we're going to talk about discipleship. We'll see you guys Sunday at 8:30 and 10.